to the health of the attendees. Therefore, no physical meeting location will be available. To access the meeting remotely, join from a PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or Android device using the URL on the agenda and on the Police Accountability Board's webpage. If you do not wish for your name to appear on the screen, use the drop-down menu and click on Rename to rename yourself to be anonymous. To request to speak, use the raise hand icon on the screen. To join by phone, you may dial the number that's on the agenda and on the website and enter the meeting ID there as well. If you wish to comment during the public comment portion of the agenda, press *9 and wait to be recognized. Shall we do a roll call?
Yes. Board Member Calavita, I don't see her. Chair Chang,
Here.
Board Member Harris,
Here.
Board Member Lefwich,
Here.
Board Member Levine,
Here.
Board Member Mizell, don't see him yet. Board Member Moore,
Here.
Board Member Owens,
Here.
and Board Member Ramsey has a leave of absence. So we have quorum, Chair.
Great. Do you have members of the public who would like to speak? I'm sorry, approval agenda first. Are there any questions with regard to the agenda? Board Member Lefwich has her hand up.
Yes, regarding item 10A, reviewing the commendations. I saw that Director Lee sent an email out about this this afternoon as well. So the commendations are more than 160 pages. Some of them are over a year old. When we did this process as part of the PRC, I just remember it took a really long time. Our process took a long time. And so when I saw 15 minutes on the agenda, I just thought that wasn't at all realistic. And this is an important issue. We don't want to give it short shrift. So my thought was that either we continue this agenda item to our next meeting and allow more time, or if people want to start tonight, do actually stop after 15 minutes because we have the training afterwards. So that was my thought just about that agenda item.
What are thoughts? Board Member Lefwich has suggested perhaps going for 15 minutes and cutting it off and going directly into our 1.5 hour traffic enforcement training from Lieutenant Tate, or postponing it to the next meeting.
It's so lengthy. I know I personally stopped after page 137. I didn't even get through all of them myself. I don't know about anybody else, but there's a lot there.
I see some people nodding their
I
heads.
agree. I was just saying, I agree. It's a lot.
Sure. Board Member
Yeah.
Harris says it is a lot, and we have a long agenda. We don't want to give short shrift to the commendations, which are important. Board Member Owens.
I support that. I think we should spend 15 minutes or so with it and then put it on the next agenda. I think we need to start on it at least, just because it's going to take time no matter when we do it. So I say we start on it, spend 15 minutes, 20 minutes if we have enough time, and then agendize it for the next meeting.
Thank you. And Board Member Levine.
Yes, other than what Director Lee sent us referencing the charter and the handbook, I forgot the exact title, procedural handbook for the PAB. Is there any, pardon me?
Standing rules.
Standing rules, thank you. That's what I was looking for. Are there any other guides to definitions of what qualifies beyond these? And if not, I would love to hear how these were handled in the PRC, because I don't think they necessarily need to be handled differently.
It was a lengthy process in the PRC. What we did was we just kind of casually went through them, and it's like, oh, well, who has, does anybody have a suggestion? Because we definitely want to limit it to things that are above and beyond, not just, somebody doing a good job, but something exceptional. And so someone would say, well, I think, the one on page 16 really warrants a commendation by this body because it fits under one of these categories. And then we talk about it and then we vote on it. So that's the way we handled it at the PRC. That's why it took so long, because it was very slow and kind of casual. I don't know if there's a better process. It did take a long time.
But do you address each and every one of the officers referenced because there are, or each, because that's a long, we're not talking about even one meeting till 11 p.m.
Yeah, no, that's not. Ideally, board members would have selected out a short list of above and beyond as a standard and officers to commend to the meeting. And we would all kind of talk about it, and then we could come to some kind of consensus. I want to make sure that Director Lee and Board Member Calavita are able to speak.
Let's spend the 15 minutes we have allotted for this, assuming we haven't run over by then, to talk about the process. So we can at least get that much done. The PRC, the old PRC commissioners can orient the new board members as to how it was done. I'm not opposed also to, a revision of the way it's done if you feel it's too tedious, but we're starting to have a pretty prolonged discussion.
I'm sorry.
I think the answer to Board Member Leftwich's original question is, sure, if you want to hold it over, you can, but let's maybe, if you have time, make some use of it, and then you'll be really ready to start at your next meeting. I also want to acknowledge the presence of board members Mizell and Calavita and Lieutenant Tate and Turner and Investigator Norris.
Great, thank you. And let's do as Director Lee suggested. We'll go over quickly the kind of overall standard for the 15 minutes. Board Member Calavita, did you want to add something to that before I shift on?
No, I don't have anything right now.
Okay, great. Any other comments on the agenda? Nope. And Board Member Levine, you still have your hand
Yeah, I'm
up.
sorry, that's a mistake.
That's okay. So we're going to shift into public comment now. Let's see. We have.
Okay, I see. I
Mr.
can allow Mr. Clark to talk while you pull up the timer.
Yes. There we go. Mr. Clark, would you like to proceed?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Madam Director, and members of the board, I am Charles Clark, a resident of City Council District 6. My subject tonight is item 10A, your review of commendations for BPD personnel. Remember, that's in accordance with Section 26 of the Charter Amendment, so it's squarely within your authority. You've heard me say before that you should review the police department that Berkeley actually has. Well, now's your chance. Like Board Member Leftwich, I don't think you should give it short shrift. These commendations offer a rare glimpse of the interpersonal touch of the department across a wide range of activities over the course of a year. Of course, what you see here has been heavily filtered, so you're seeing essentially successful outcomes that someone thought was worth a compliment, usually a supervisor, but often a member of the public as well. I believe the Police Review Commission in its last 2 years applied a standard like above and beyond to recognize police employees, as board members Leftwich and Chang said. I encourage you to apply a similarly high standard to this year's candidates because I think that recognition from this board should be meaningful. In this time of reimagining public safety, I also invite you to notice the range of activities that our officers perform, as well as the distinction with which they perform it. Sometimes it takes a large team effort, as in the apprehension of the man who was breaking into women's homes to rob and sexually assault them. You can find that starting at page 27 of the packet. Sometimes it's a smaller group, like the one that talked a person out of jumping off the roof of a city garage south of campus, which you can see at page 19. Sometimes it's a lead officer assisted by others, like the ones who arrested a man with a machete who was tossing Molotov cocktails at Union Pacific trains, starting page 88. And sometimes it's a solo officer, like the one who answered complaints of drug sales in a parking lot quite effectively, which you can see at page 98. Whether these particular encounters rise to the board's standard is for you to decide, of course. The ones I mentioned certainly caught my attention. There are others, of course, but I will say that you do have a good lot to choose from. It's worth seeing the police department we have and commending the performance that you would like to see more of. Thank you.
Thank you. So, and next we have
Rivka Palatnik.
Rivka Palatnik. Would you like to speak, Ms.
Yes,
Palatnik?
thank you. So I tend to speak when I have something I'm unhappy about, but this time I want to emphasize that I'm really happy with you folks. As someone who worked to create Measure II, to get it on the ballot, to get it approved by the voters, I had high hopes for it. And I think you're a really great team, a dream team. And I'm really happy that you have the mandate to move this forward. I do have some concerns about the PAB being overlooked or passed over or not allowed to perform what it's supposed to perform. So I just want to urge you to stay strong. And as a public member of the Director's Search Subcommittee, we feel we're not getting enough input, or at least it's very vague and undefined. And we hope you'll support us in having a meaningful role, as well as the whole PAB having a meaningful role, because that's a really important decision and position, and you will have the most to benefit from someone who's really good and effective. Whoever it is will have to fill the shoes of Kathy Lee, but I'm sure they'll be a good choice if you all have good input into the choice. So keep up the good work, and thank you for all that you have been doing and will be doing.
Thank you very much. Who do we have next?
I'm sorry.
We have
Yes, we do. Victor Apostle,
thank you, Ms. Victor Apostle. Are you ready to speak?
or
Yeah. Very. Okay, hey, members of the board, this is Apostle Victor. All right, my question is this: how do you deal with handle cases of bad behavior from police officers? Let's say, for example, you sold a real estate, a land to an officer, and you didn't want to pay off. All right, so how?
We seem to have lost you, Apostle Victor, with your connection. Can you hear us? Okay, we're not able to hear you. So I'm going to stop the clock, and perhaps at the end of the meeting, you can try to get on again, but try to come on with a better signal. Thank you.
and Chair, if I may suggest
Yeah.
that he can contact our office. It sounded like he was asking a question, so I'd like, if staff could help him, I'm happy to do that. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Apostle Victor, please contact the Police Accountability Board.
all our office information is on the agenda, which I assume you have since you were able to dial in.
Thank you. Okay, So next on the agenda, we have approval of minutes. Are there any comments or questions about the minutes from the regular meeting of April 13th, 2022? I'm seeing not shaking of heads. So is there a motion to approve?
I'll move.
That's
A
board member-
second.
Second of Board Member Harris. Any other comments or questions or objections to the motion?
I'm sorry, was that Board Member Leftwich moving?
Yes, and then seconded by Board Member Harris.
Thank you.
Can we just do this by consensus?
Mhm.
Okay. So not seeing or hearing any objections, it's so moved. Item 5, Chair and Board Members reports. I don't have anything in particular to report. So I'm going to give the time to Board Members Calavita on the police chief search.
No update from me. I have repeatedly tried to get in touch with HR to get you an update, but I think that the answer is that we're in the stage of anticipating, waiting for applicants. So I have nothing to report right now.
Thank you. Moving on to the Director Lee's Director of Police Accountability Report.
Thank you. Before I start, I just want to mention I had forgotten to give Board Member Mizell a heads up, but I had taken reimagining updates off the agenda because the task force itself is done. Of course, there's a lot of work still happening. So I was kind of thinking you did not need to make a report. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
But I'm happy to update the board as things develop in the city on that.
Oh, okay. Why don't you go ahead and report on that?
Well, nothing too much right now, but
Oh, okay.
other than I guess the meeting last week on was it on Thursday,
Last
where
Thursday.
City Council had the initial conversation with the city managers response to, I guess, the process of reimagining. So there was first, of course, Nick Jr.'s report. Then there was our report as a reimagining public safety task force. And now we have the city manager's report as well. Though it's not, to be clear, a full report laying out all the proposals of reimagining, but their kind of immediate responses, what can be actionable in the short term. But there's the mayor is planning to roll out a larger plan in that regard. But certainly I'll update the board as we get more knowledge on that. But yeah, it doesn't need to be agendized per se, but if something changes, I'm happy to reach out and update.
Okay. Thank you. As for my report, no new complaints have been filed since the last meeting. Last night, council postponed the surveillance technology reports and use policy for automatic license plate readers until the May 10th meeting. Also last night, the city's communications team gave a preview of the city's new website, which will be launching very soon, maybe within a couple weeks. So that's really exciting. I think there's unanimity on that. Not one person could disagree that the upgrade was sorely needed. I want to remind you of a number of things coming up. Tomorrow at 12:30, the police department budget will be presented to the council's budget committee. Might not be exactly that time. It kind of depends on how the presentations before them go. And then Friday morning, I will be presenting our budget to the budget committee. I was scheduled for 9 o'clock, but the city attorney needed to go first. So I'm now scheduled for 10 o'clock, but the mayor actually has to approve the change in the agenda. But I'm pretty certain that request will be granted. And so so 10 o'clock around 10 o'clock for my presentation. And I believe I had sent you all the link, but it's on the budget committee page, meetings page. Tomorrow night at 7 o'clock is the Mental Health Commission's meeting regarding exploring a diversion approach to people in mental health crisis. And they have a lot of people lined up for that panel. So it sounds very interesting. And today was Administrative Professionals Day. So I want to publicly thank and acknowledge our administrative support person, Maritza Martinez, for her dedicated work for our office. And then last but not least, where is Byron? There he is. Investigator Byron Norris's last day will be Monday, May 2nd. And I must publicly acknowledge and thank him for his 12 years of work on behalf of the Police Review Commission and now the Office of Director of Police Accountability. He's been an invaluable member of our team, and I really hate to see him go, but he's intent on retiring while he's still relatively young and can do a whole bunch of other things, which I'm very envious of. So he's been spending the past 2 to 3 weeks training our new investigator, Beniba Thomas. And it sounds like, you know, so far that's been going very well. I'm really happy about both the relationship that they've developed, and it seems to me that Byron's done a great job explaining things to Ms. Thomas. So I'm confident that the work will be carried on. Of course, there's a lot of institutional knowledge that Byron will be taking with him. But again, Byron, thank you very much. You were here when I first came on, and so you really oriented me to the Police Review Commission and all the workings of investigations and Board of Inquiry hearings. And I really thank you for all your assistance to me personally, but also your dedication to oversight as being fair, impartial, objective. And that's the way you have always carried yourself. I believe the police department feels that you're fair, even though by its nature, it's a somewhat adversarial role that you have with respect to the police department. But I think you've carried your charge forward very well, and I will definitely miss you. And I'll give you the opportunity to say a few words if you like.
I'll keep it brief, and thank you for the kind words, Director Lee. It's been a great joy working with you. I've had 4 PRC officers, but Kathy's been here the longest and been the most joy to work with. And I work with various boards and many commissioners over the years. It's been a pleasure and an adventure working with all of you. Kitty, you and I have worked on a number of subcommittees together in projects.
Can't thank you enough, Byron.
Nathan's used to me nagging him to get to NACO, and so's John Moore.
Thanks for sending me on that flight. I would have been screwed.
Cheryl and I have just started our fights, which I enjoyed. I'm going to miss those. And Regina, we were just getting to know each other. I'm going to miss you. And Deborah, we've had some interesting conversations. I'm going to miss those. And Michael and Julie. It's been 12 and a half years. It's been fun. I've learned a lot. I started in child support investigations, and I migrated 12 years ago over to this kind of work, which was new to me. And when I started here, I was expecting the worst, but I was pleasantly surprised that we had a group of committed volunteers and our commissioners who loved the work, respected the charge of oversight. I learned, I really appreciated that. I've also worked with 4 police chiefs, 4 wonderful police chiefs. We've gone through a number of revisions, the latest with this latest charter, which is some work, but I'm sure we'll get through it and come out with some really good regulations when this is all done, I hope. I do believe we may have to go back to the voters sooner than later to correct that charter, but that's my that's my opinion. I believe it's very important, and I don't want to get preachy. You guys got work to do. In order for this work to be effective, we have to be open-minded and fair-minded and just to all parties, complainants, subject officers, any users of our service, and we have to project stellar oversight to the public and to the people that we serve. And I've always tried to do that. One thing that has made my job easy is that we have a good police department compared to what I've learned and know over these last 12 years about police in general. We have some really not great police departments in our country, some really terrible police departments. And our police department is light years ahead of that, based on my knowledge and experience of police oversight and police agencies and the work that they do. We have a low number of complaints. We have a low number of serious complaints. I was always thankful. I expected it when I started this work, that people would be coming in my office with broken arms, serious cases, and they just never really worked out. That never really panned out. And I appreciate that our department doesn't send me those kinds of complaints. They're very few and far between. It's not to say that the department can make some improvements here and there, but as a member of the public, Charles Clark likes to say to you all, let's meet our department where they are and work from there to improve them further. There is room for improvements, but I think in my experience, again, we have a pretty good police department. And I think that's all ours say. I just want to thank you all for the support that you've given me and for putting up with me. And I'm going to miss you all.
Bye.
Thank you, Byron.
All right.
And that's the end of my report, Chair.
Thank you, Director Lee. And also I want to thank Investigator Norris for his years of public service and his professionalism, inquisitiveness, objectivity, and humor. I've enjoyed working with him over the past several years as well, and we will miss you. Hopefully you'll come back. Maybe you'll be popping up on the public attendees list. You will behave yourself when you come up on those public attendees lists, Mr. Norris. Thank you so much for your many years of service.
All right.
Thanks. So on to the subcommittee reports.
Excuse me, I believe
we have Chief of
Lieutenant Turner has a report on behalf of Chief.
Thanks for the reminder, Director Lee. Lieutenant Turner.
Good evening. I just also want to congratulate Byron. I know you're off camera, but congratulations to you on your time with PRC and PAB. And I hope you enjoy your retirement. The chief wasn't able to make it tonight. She had an unexpected conflict, and she's also doing some last minute preparations for the department's budget presentation tomorrow morning that Director Lee mentioned. I have 4 cases that she wanted to share with everybody. So I'll go through those now. On April 22nd at around 2 a.m., officers responded to a loud reports call in the 2400 block of Durant Avenue. Once in the area, they discovered a vehicle near Bancroft and Telegraph with a bullet hole in it. Officers contacted the vehicle owner and learned that he had been the victim of a robbery via gun. In the course of the robbery, the suspect discharged the firearm twice and fled north on Telegraph onto UC campus. Both BPD and UC Berkeley PD conducted a coordinated response to search for the suspect, but he remains outstanding. Our detectives have developed some promising leads in that case. On April 19th, the communication center received numerous 911 calls at around 8 p.m. regarding gunfire heard near the intersection of 8th and Addison Street. The area was cordoned off so that BPD could search for evidence. While no victims have come forward at this time, BPD canvassed the area for video surveillance and detectives will be continuing the investigation. Last week, there was a case where a woman was shot in the face with a BB gun. She reported that 3 individuals shot her as they drove out of one of the gas stations at Shattuck and Ashby. That investigation is also ongoing and may be related to other cases in the area. And then finally, on April 14th at about 1:20 in the afternoon, we received a report of a female in her 20s who was forced off of the sidewalk and taken a short distance to a secluded place by threats of a knife by a male in his mid-30s. The male then committed a sexual assault. A senior detective has been assigned to the case as the lead detective, and the entire sex crimes unit is working the case. An extensive canvass for video and witness, for video and for witnesses has been done and is ongoing. Tips from the public and our law enforcement partners are being followed up on, and physical evidence recovered from the scene is being processed. Since our last meeting, we did have 1 officer clear the field training program, so that's great. And they are now a solo officer. We also had 1 officer retire after 20 years of service. Our current actual staffing level is 156 sworn officers, with 8 of those being either in the academy or in the field training program. Over the course of the last several months, significant staff time has been devoted to several key projects, which include continued efforts to implement FIP recommendations, inaugural reporting and creation / edits of impact statements, use policies and annual report for police special equipment, reimagining public safety proposals, development of upcoming fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24 budget proposals, implementation of audit report recommendations from the 3 open city audits, which are for the communication center, calls for service, and police budget, development and improvement to public facing open data via a soon to launch transparency hub, and efforts on several other strategic plan priorities. The chief mentions this to give some background as to the amount of administrative work being conducted, excuse me, to support our overall responsibilities to public safety, accountability, and transparency. The chief will be discussing many of these efforts in the department's budget presentation tomorrow, and will be providing the budget slides to Director Lee to share with the PAB as soon as the final edits are completed. And that's what I have from the chief.
Thank you very much. Sounds like a very busy week. Moving on to subcommittee reports. Fair and impartial policing implementation.
Yes, the subcommittee continues to meet regularly. Our last meeting was April 20th, and we were able to meet with Captain Roleri and Sergeant Lee regarding the EIS form, the Early Intervention System form, and the consent search form, both of which you saw drafts of at the last meeting. So we'll continue to work on that. Our next meeting is being scheduled, and it will likely involve the issue of traffic enforcement. So that's all I have for now.
Thank you. Can we go to item 8B, the director search? Board Member Levine, do you have anything?
Yes. I think this is also on the agenda separately, but I can give a very brief report now, and that'll be it, really, because I think it's to be continued.
Yes, if there's no action that's being taken, then if you just have a report out, then you can do it now.
Okay, thank you. So based on our discussion at our last meeting, I finally was able to talk to Deputy City Manager Bello on Monday, this just day before yesterday. We talked about how this board, subcommittee, whatever form we decide, has, a significant role in the selection of director. And I'm pretty confident that that is going to happen. So what's happening now is they're going to close applications this Friday. And at the time we talked Monday, there were only 5 applicants, which is not very many, but that could change dramatically as the deadline approaches. And then Deputy Director Bello and I agreed we would talk shortly thereafter, because the buyers group is going to do the first level of background checking, which I assume is pretty, standard perfunctory, just to, dot the I's and cross the T's in terms of, criminal record, etc. And then the field of applicants will be narrowed after that. So we will talk, we talked about May 6th potentially as the date we would talk about how many applicants there are that will be interviewed, and we will have a participant in that interview process. So I say stay tuned until after we see the number of applicants and what my conversation with her is like on the 6th. So I think that was a good interaction with some hopeful future participation, or more than hopeful, stated. So that's it.
Barbara, if I can ask, was there any, you mentioned the background check, was any detail provided?
I'm the one who assumed that would be part of what the buyers group does. They're not going to really, they're going to do the first level of checking, which I assume is maybe calling references, taking notes, getting fingerprints, whatever, those kind of level of expected narrowing, which may or may not narrow the field at all. And it's after that I'm going to talk to Ms. Bello about the interview process, which will be set up and we will participate in. That's a will do. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, board member. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Vice Chair Mizell, for acting in my absence. Moving on to regulations, which I'm chair of. We met on April 21st, and we have gone through the entire document again. And we're going to have next meetings on May 4th, and we have one planned on the 6th to ensure that the police department, through Lieutenant Montgomery, who has been meeting with us routinely, has full opportunity to address all aspects of the permanent regulations, which is what we are going through now. So he has been there the whole time, and he's provided input throughout, and we have considered the input, and he's also in the process of preparing further input based upon our prior conversations, is my understanding. And we're going to hear that hopefully on May 4th. So we are moving along. We are hopeful that we can move through this with just 2 more meetings. We do know that the permanent regulations are important to the functioning of the PAB, and we are taking it very seriously and have met many, many times for many hours. So it is moving forward, and hopefully next time we meet, we'll have good news that we are approaching completion. Are there any other comments from the regulations committee on this? Board Member Calavita?
Yeah, I think that we agreed on the 4th that we could have quite a long meeting and try to get through it. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my recollection.
So it may not meet the 6th.
Yes, the 6 is a placeholder.
Yeah,
Hopefully we'll be able to work through things on the 4th and get that all done.
great. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? Not seeing or hearing any. Mental health issues, response and crisis stabilization.
That's on hold for these priority subcommittees, so nothing new.
Okay, thank you, Board Member Levine. Policy 351, fixed surveillance cameras.
I believe that's me and Board Ramsey. We have not met. That is probably primarily on me. I feel a bit overwhelmed with where I'm at. So I guess that's on hold along with obviously the other subcommittees. Yeah.
Thank you and good luck on your midterms. I know this is a busy time for you. PAB budget proposal.
So we have not met since our last full board meeting. The budget is going to the council subcommittee on Friday, as Director Lee mentioned earlier. So that's where we stand.
Great, thank you. And it looks like.
Oh, before you go on, I'd like to acknowledge the letter that was written by Subcommittee Member Levine. It was an excellent letter in support of our request in that budget. So I just want to acknowledge her expertise in writing that letter. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for reminding us. Thank you, Board Member Levine. And it looks like old business 9A we already addressed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
think so.
Does Board Member Levine, do you feel you've thoroughly addressed old business under 9A?
Yes.
Okay. Let's proceed to 9B. Discuss how to prioritize the work of the Police Accountability Board and Director of Police Accountability and conduct a prioritization process with Board Member Calavita.
Okay, so on page 13 of tonight's packet, I believe it is.
Yes.
It's the list of items. It goes over to the next, turn the page over, you'll see more. And some of these things are a few of these things I believe have been completed. Some of them are pending, as we heard from the various subcommittees. But I would like to propose that a couple of these things that we have not prioritized in the recent past should be given increasing priority. I know that our plate has been very full. As the chair mentioned, it looks like the regulation subcommittee will be finishing up our work pretty soon. Not that, you know, there'll be other aspects of it, but the subcommittee's work probably will be done pretty soon, and that will open up some of us for other kinds of work. I would propose that outreach needs to be prioritized. And I know that from being on the PRC, it kind of took a back seat because there's always like time sensitive things that have to be done and it always gets pushed to the side. But I think it is really important, especially in today's climate, that, well, it's important that people know we exist, number one, and number two, know what we do. And so I would hope that a proactive outreach subcommittee could be formed in the near future. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, I think we need to pick up again on the Lexipol policies. There are a lot of things that are have been waiting for our attention, the Lexipol policies. And so I would like to prioritize those two things as some of our other work winds down. And not that I'm volunteering necessarily, but you know, that's what I would propose. I mean, I don't know exactly how. I think the other things are in progress. Some of them have not, or you know, or have not yet gotten underway. But you know, I believe we've discussed the hate crimes policy. We're finishing up on the commendation. So some of these things are basically concluding. The regulations are concluding as far as the subcommittee work goes. So I think it's time to prioritize those two items. That's really all I have right now.
Thank
I
you.
think we should have a discussion.
Okay, are there any comments and questions for Board Member Calavita about her two priorities?
I think they're good priorities. I agree with everything she said, and I will say you can add the director search and the budget committees, which I've been spending a lot of time on. So I am going to follow up on mental health subcommittee because we set that aside, but I have some other interests that are probably in that Lexipol category. So.
Thank you. Other?
I wanted to ask Director Lee, with regard to subcommittee assignments, am I correct that because these are not standing committees, we're proceeding as we have in the past, but you're collecting some names of public members who could be interested?
Well, I've collected just a couple who have taken the initiative, but I haven't had time to do that publicizing part. So that's what's been lacking.
Okay.
I actually, at one point, I did find some time to work on a draft application form. And I think the next thing to do would be maybe if you, I don't know, I could put it out to the whole board to look at if the board wanted to form a subcommittee. It's sort of like outreach work. So if you formed an outreach subcommittee to look at it. I mean, I don't think that in and of itself would take a lot of work.
But I think the outreach subcommittee is especially one that could use some proactive public members.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are some members of the public that are hearing this now, and we will do some.
So you could form a subcommittee and then always with just board members, and then add once the application process is going. I think the standing rules say that we have to create a pool, and so I would imagine that we would want to have it open for at least a month before we make any appointments from it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd have to figure out how, you know, how the application process is publicized. So having the new website will be helpful. Simply because it's going to be easier to add things and announce things. And then we have the list of community faith-based organizations. When the PRC did that webinar to publicize the application process for this board, I think we still have that list. And I think, you know, I was thinking I would rely on that as a start. And then maybe circulate that, see if people had other ideas as to, publicizing this public members on subcommittees application process.
It's just occurred to me that that the outreach activities, we may not yet be in the environment for doing outreach activities in person.
Maybe not. Well, outdoors, maybe.
Anyway, I don't know if other people have other ideas as to what should be prioritized, but those were my suggestions.
Board Member Owens, you had your hand raised. And then Vice Chair Mizell.
I was just going to mention that as part of the outreach, it should also include the citizen application for community members to be on the subcommittee. That's another way to advertise that role. So, and I know we don't have the outreach subcommittee set up or process set up, but I think that's another way to get the word out for the citizen work.
Thank you, Vice Chair Mizell.
I agree with all the comments so far. Definitely agree the outreach should be one of our focuses. I think Board Member Calavita said it, it's always been kind of pushed, and again, not because of lack of things we've had to do, but I do think it is important. And I agree as well about LexiPool, which, either we get back to it or we'll keep building. So definitely agree on both those. I'll just add, and I know this kind of goes in with the city attorney, but if we don't gain clarity here shortly, I think we need to get clarity about the scope of our powers, and to me, I'll speak clearly on the subpoena power, for instance. To me, it's still unclear how we would actually use this very clearly stated power in the charter. I don't believe we've received a clear answer of the board, how it could be used, what would happen if deadlines were not met. And it's kind of been left up into the air as well. We'll get to it along with a billion other things, but to me, it's critical to understand how we can use the powers that are clearly stated in the charter. The charter will be used, directly against us in other contexts. So we should be able to fully utilize the powers that are in it. And I don't think that has happened yet. And I'll be honest, it bothers me greatly that it does not happen, because I don't know. Obviously, voters voted, a lot of people voted for it. I won't say everybody. A lot of people voted for this board because we were supposed to have more teeth. That was, for a lot of voters in this city, the reason they voted for this. We are going to have more teeth. And right now, and as I think Board Member his analogy about the car, I still don't know how to drive the car. I didn't even learn the car is not functioning, but we don't know how to drive it because things that frankly should have been cleared up have not been cleared up. And frankly, if any one of us as a board member brought up a proposal to subpoena anything, a pen from the department, I don't know what would happen. And the board has been functioning for, well, none of us know what happened. The board's been functioning for quite some time now for us to not know that. So I'll stop there. It's a bit of a rant of mine, but I think it's really important that gets cleared up soon. And if not, then that should be one of our focuses, obviously among outreach and LexiPool, as Board Member Calavita mentioned. Thanks.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And that's an important remark that we kind of are still in the test drive phase, and there's different functions that we have not been able to utilize and are not even aware of. Board Member Leftwich, and then Director Lee has her hand raised.
First, I agree with the priorities that Board Member Calavita raised, and I would be happy to serve on the LexiPool subcommittee. I served on that with the PRC, but it's a ton of work. So I know we've talked about holding off until we're done with the regulations before embarking on that again. And then just in response to what Board Member Mizell said, these issues have come up during the course of our drafting of the permanent regulations. There are several questions that we're going to be proposing to the city attorney and to the full board, because they're just some thorny issues. But I agree that we need some clarity. And of course, there will be concerns raised by BPA and by the department. So we're still working it out, but we are well aware that there are issues that need clarifying. And we're hoping that we'll get that clarity sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Board Member Leftwich. Director Lee?
I was basically going to say what Board Member Leftwich just said, was to let Board Member Mizell know that the Regulations Subcommittee has extensively discussed use of the subpoena power, and there are a handful of issues that we need city attorney's guidance on related to the regulations, and it's my intent to package those all up and make a request for guidance on all the issues that have risen in the course of trying to draft permanent regulations.
Okay, thank you
for the update.
Yeah, thank you, Director Lee. All righty, is there any other commentary and discussions? Just a quick time check at 7:58 on prioritization. So I think previously we discussed, Director Lee, whether or not there needs to be a motion for like future committees. Maybe we'll just get to it when we get to it, or is that something we need to do now with?
Well, you haven't agendized any particular subcommittee, so I don't think you could do it tonight. So
is that something, Board Member Calavita, you think you want to do that earlier rather than later, agendize? Would that make sense, Director Lee?
We could do it for the next meeting, yeah.
Right, for the next meeting, outreach. So it'd be outreach committee and Lexipol policies. Lexipol policy is certainly something that is kind of a bread and butter committee that has been in the PRC. We want to agendize that, and I agree with the outreach committee as well. Can Board Member Calavita request agendizing it?
Any board member can request.
Yeah. So would you
So
like?
I'll
to
do that.
request
I've made a note, and she doesn't have to remind me. And
Okay, great. So for next meeting, if there's no other comments on the prioritization of the PAB, then we'll move on to new business. So we said we're going to have a quick 15-minute conversation. We did have kind of extended conversation at the front end about the commendations. So let's try to keep that succinct. Maybe we can do it in shorter than 15 minutes. But for the folks who were on the PRC, including myself, there are several of us here. One of the latest iterations was that above and beyond standard. And the practice was to come to the meetings having had some opportunity to review all the good works that officers have done. And part of the reason for the above and beyond was not to kind of narrow the gate, so to speak, but there's an understanding that, as Vice Chair, I think Mizell noted, if I'm remembering correctly, we want to acknowledge officers who have done something that's not necessarily extraordinary, but something of great value in terms of policing and under the kind of community policing model that the BPD has a orientation towards and goal towards and a practice of, versus standard good works that should be, we hope, recognized during performance reviews, standard performance reviews, as kind of the vision from what I recall. And if the other PRC members want to add to that so that folks understand the standard moving forward, so that when we come back next week, they can have more clarity, having had, not next week, but in the next meeting, having had the time to review using that principle. Board Member Owens, Vice Chair Mizell, and then Board Member Calavita.
As a new board member, I think it's worthwhile that people review the standing rules. I think Section L deals with commendations. It's very clear what the standard is. It is for extraordinary. It says that specifically in the standing rules, so it's for extraordinary service. Or service or performed in an extraordinary manner, and it outlines 4 different criteria. So I'm not going to go through them, in the interest of time. But I even as a new board member, I think it's outlined very well in the standing rules how we're supposed to approach this. So it's in section L.
Great, thank you for that reminder. And I misspoke. Extraordinary is, of course, beyond and above and beyond. Sorry, Vice Chair Mizell.
Yes, Chair, I was just going to say, totally respectfully, just I didn't say that. What I would have said is that, it's the extraordinary standard. And I think you may have just misspoke, because I know beforehand we had the extraordinary standard, but it was very vague.
Yeah,
and we, as Board Member Leftwich had mentioned, that, and we had then developed the new standard, which is still extraordinary, but gives us more clear bullet points to work with in terms of defining that. Even though, there's still obviously open interpretation, but that's why we have the meeting and the conversation. But just wanted to clarify that.
That's right. That's super helpful. Thank you for the clarification. Board Member Calavita.
Oh, I thought I took my hand down. I was just going to say extraordinary. Yeah. Sorry. I do. Are we going to actually discuss recommendations? Because I did actually get through all these and had a couple.
So we had a conversation, as Board Member Leftwich is noting, whether or not that we were just going to talk about the principles, and because we have an hour and a half training that Lieutenant Tate is waiting on, and we have public members, we thought we'd do that at the next meeting. Board Member Leftwich, then Levine, and Director Lee.
Just thinking about process, how we want to handle this, because there are so many. And I don't know if it makes sense to go through them in batches, in order. Say, does anybody have any nominations, if that's the right word, from the pages 15 to 50, or I don't know how we want to do it, but we should probably figure that out.
Board Member Calavita, you're nodding your head, and then on.
Well, I just was going to say that I thought that the PRC eventually came to quite a good procedure that wasn't that slow in my memory, where each person lists the ones, there was a lot of overlap. So each person says, these are my 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever it is. And then the next person and just explains, but there is a lot of overlap and consistency. So, I think we all probably, I bet that we all will pick many of the same ones, and it ends up not taking as long as it seems like it might, because we don't have to go page by page. We can just list our top priorities.
Yeah, that's my recollection too. That's my preference. But Director Lee has her hand up, and she has lots of institutional memory here.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the key is really that each board member has gone through the whole packet, the whole batch of commendations beforehand, and identified the ones that they think are likely candidates. And Board Member Owens didn't want to read this to take up time, but I'm going to read it because I want the public to know what the standards are, and it's not that long.
Great, thank
so
you.
The four are exceptional valor, bravery, or heroism, superior handling of a difficult situation, an action or performance that is above and beyond typical duties, or extraordinary compassion, empathy, or kindness. So those are the criteria. It needs to meet one of those 4 categories to be singled out. And the reading, it's a lot of pages, but most of the reading, it's quick. You're not reading, a dissertation. You're reading heartfelt letters or letters of commendation from superiors about particular outstanding work. So it's not difficult.
Great, thank you. That's super helpful. Board Member Owens, and then Board Member Levine.
Well, I want to make a suggestion, but I'm not sure if it potentially could be a Brown Act violation. But is it possible for us to send our list to Director Lee, and then Director Lee send it out to the full board. That way, when we come to the board meeting, we've all reviewed all of everyone's recommendation. And we can, I think, get through it a lot faster rather than seeing them at the meeting and then having to go through it. It would be helpful to me that we all put something together, send it to the director, and then she sends it back to us, and then we can go through and review them all before we get to the next board meeting.
Like that idea.
For sure, you can send them all to me. I'll have to think some more about sending them back out, sending everybody's list to each other. That's starting to sound like a serial meeting to me. But it would still be helpful if you identified it beforehand. Because then what I could do is at the meeting, then provide you with some sort of tally. For instance, I could say the commendations on pages 68, 102 and 110 receive unanimous votes from all the board members that these deserve commendation. So that would that would help. I don't know if I don't know if the second part is doable, and I can think about it and ask for advice. But for sure that would help speed things up, even if you could only do the first part.
Yeah,
So
the tally makes no sense.
yeah, anything you can do would be helpful. And I would ask, I think it would be helpful for me as well if, when we submit our recommendations, that we categorize it by one of these
Right.
4 things. And
Right.
then that way the director, when she sends it to us, we can have a list of, these are under exceptional valor or whatever. It's just anything to help us get through this process.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I think that would make a lot of sense. Board Member Levine, do you still have your hand up from previous?
Well, yeah, this is exactly what I was going to suggest. So, do we need a motion to do it this way, or can we informally? I think that it's important that each of us put the page number and the name, send it to Director Lee, and then have her do a tally and give us the results of the tally before the next meeting or the meeting where we're going to discuss these as a whole. That's what I would suggest. I think that will expedite and illuminate the whole process.
Yeah,
And
Director.
also doing the ABC on these 4-point bullet points.
Right. I don't think you need a motion.
Okay.
You're deciding how you're going to carry out the process that's already provided for. So, but just with the caveat that I don't know if I could send the tally back out. I can receive it from you, and I'll see if I could send it back out before the meeting. But if not, I'll have it all prepared for you to see at the meeting.
Okay. That sounds great.
Okay, so I will send a reminder for people to do that, and then give
Thank you.
give you the deadline.
Okay, great. Thank you for doing so.
Very helpful.
That'd be helpful. So are we done with the commendations? Yes.
Now.
So we've got a
For
plan
now, right.
for now. And that means that we can hit the traffic enforcement training, which is 1.5 hours, and it's now 8:11.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chair. I forgot. Last time there was a training, and I think a couple times ago we had public comment before the training. And I forgot to agendize it that way, but
Okay.
so I'm going to ask if anybody on the board wants to make that motion to take public comment.
Yeah, because it's long. Can someone make that motion?
Yeah, I make a motion. We take
I
public comment.
second it.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to share my screen again. You're going to pull up.
Wait, you didn't vote? You didn't ask if there's any opposition.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. I just made an assumption. Is there any opposition to the motion, which has been raised and seconded? Neither hearing nor seeing any, so moved. So we're going to shift agenda item 11, public comment, forward before 10B. Let me share my screen for the timer. Let's see if any member of the public would like to speak.
Yeah, just a second. When you turn the timer on, then I lose my participant list. I have to get it up again. Okay. Carol Marasovic.
Ms. Marasovic, would you like to speak?
Yeah, hang on. I'm having a mouse problem.
No worries. Take your time.
Okay. Carol, you should be able to speak.
Actually, I'm speaking on the earlier item, the crisis stabilization, because according to the commissioner's manual, commissions are supposed to take public comment on items as they come up, as well as at the beginning of the agenda for non-agenda items. So you mentioned, or Commissioner Levine mentioned that you're going to continue with this item. So last night, and the crisis stabilization item from the Homeless Commission, as revised, passed at council. It passed on the consent calendar has unanimously. So, and I can describe what that is in terms of the revision, but you would should look at item 38A on the annotated agenda. Staff had opposed the recommendation. Our recommendation was that that staff implement or refer to city manager to establish a crisis stabilization program or center, rather, based on the Bend, Oregon model tailored to Berkeley. So staff opposed it for a number of reasons, issues with Medi-Cal billing, essentially wanting to defer this to the council, to the county. And you can see that in 38B. So Councilmember Chaplin, who actually has been working very closely with me on this item, was going to bring his own item, but he could not, but staff had, and that was actually on the 12th, and staff had met with him and asked him to temporarily withdraw it. He wanted to bring it back, so he couldn't do it in that form. So he wrote something from the District 2 office as a supplemental item to the Homeless Commission item, essentially revising it in such a way to make it appealing enough for all of council to pass it, which they did. They passed it on consent. And it was, he referred to it as a consensus building item. It essentially says the same thing, but it says staff will study implementing a crisis stabilization center based on the Deschutes County, which is the Bend model. So but it also said that about the county enabling Medi-Cal billing with the county, and then in the interim to use the resources that that staff described in their report, which was Amber House in Oakland and a peer respite that we actually don't have. So, but you can read that on the annotated agenda as 38A, passed on consent unanimously at council last night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Saganor is next.
Ms. Saganor, are you ready to speak?
I am. Thank you so much for taking my comment. I actually wanted to comment on two things. In terms of public members for subcommittees, I, for one, have great confidence that that Director Lee has done a really fine job of putting together a application process. And so I would recommend that the board, in the interest of getting together more quickly, that the board just put it on the agenda for a meeting, and probably would not take you long to say, oh yes, that looks great, let's approve it. And then that could get along on that process, because as I've mentioned, I'm very much interested in contributing my my 2 cents, or rather, to work with you all on some of those issues. And then the other thing is, I have an opinion about Brown Act. In terms of the commendations, I actually think that once you've sent the commendations into the director, if she wants to send it back to you, she would need to post it publicly at that point, so that she can't really send it out in private, which might have the unwanted result of making having sort of a nomination thing where people who think they might be getting a commendation would say, oh, look, it's a couple of people want me, but I don't know. So I don't know how you want to handle it, but I certainly her suggestion about organizing it and so putting it out at the meeting with a list makes a whole lot of sense. But I don't know about this. I really do think that if she were to send it to you privately, that would be a Brown Act issue. So thank you very much. As you know, I really admire the work you all do and really appreciate the time and the effort that you contribute to doing this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Egner. And do you have Amir Chappelle?
Yes.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is Amir Chappell. It's a pleasure to be here. This discussion has been very informative and uplifting. As you know, if you think back to 2018, when the PRC received approximately about only 13 complaints, which was like the lowest amount of complaints within the previous 5 years, you wonder, is BPD really doing really well? Or are citizens and community members not reporting incidences where they feel like it's necessary to file a complaint? And this leads me to the discussion that you had about prioritization in the city, about what should the PAB do? What should the focus do? And I think you're talking about community and street outreach it's like a cornerstone of the work you do in addition to the policy work, because I heard Chair Chang mention the bread and butter is the Lexipol policy, and the PAB focuses a lot on policy, and I understand that, and that is highly important. But the people from the most impacted communities are not going to be met with emails, websites, and things of that nature. What really needs to happen, which I didn't see as a priority in the proposed budget, was funding for street outreach and community engagement. I don't feel the PAB has the capacity to do that on their own. And so you really need to go out there. Despite COVID, the most impacted people need to be met where they're at. I feel like this kind of street outreach will, one, raise awareness about what the PAB does, how it aligns with the concerns of the community and the concerns of the city and the concerns of the police department, in addition to the concerns of the union. And of course, some of those relationships are inherently adversarial, and that street outreach that you would use to reach the most impacted people is somewhat of a similar method that I feel like would be beneficial in engaging some of the more adversarial partners. Myself, for example, I saw that the PAB application form had a background check requirement in there. And although that doesn't bar someone from serving, it does deter a lot of people from applying. So I just want to highlight some of the perceived barriers from the community member side as to how to even engage the PAB, understand the work that the PAB does, and how the community can be supportive and effective in moving the PAB's agenda forward. And I just wanted to highlight that. And I really appreciate Chair Mizell talking about the carrot, the above and beyond. Too often we focus a lot on the negative of law enforcement, and throwing them a carrot and highlighting some of the positive is always a great idea. So I really thank you for your time and your work on everything you do in the city of Berkeley. Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies for mispronouncing your name, Mr. Chappell. And next we have, I believe, Charles Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to commend the retiring investigator, Mr. Norris, not because not in reciprocity for his mentioning my name, but because in the 4 years that I've been watching police accountability in this city, I've seen him behave very well towards actual citizens and more importantly, keep things moving for the Police Review Commission and now for the Police Accountability Board. So I thank him for his years of service, and I hope he has a good retirement. Secondly, I'd like to say that I support Board Member Calavita's prioritization of both outreach and of the Lexapol. Both of those things are very important, and reprising what you just heard in the previous comment, allowing people out in the street to know that there exists an outlet for a complaint or even a commendation, but more importantly, the complaint, to find out that the system is working for them. That's an integral part of police accountability, and it will do something to support the trust the community will have in the whole system. The system isn't just the police department, it's also that the police department is acting the way the city's people want it to work. So I think letting people know that you exist is going to help that goal. And of course, the Lexapol work is very important because the policies of the department are a core feature of your responsibilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And looks like we have Emily R. next. Emily Raguso, would you like to speak? Mr. Raguso.
Hello, thank you. Yes, this is Emily from Berkeley side. And I just wanted to, on the subject of reimagining, well, one, it was very, sorry, I cannot stop my buzzer from going, so we're just gonna have to ignore that, my doorbell. It was nice to hear from Amir Chappell. He was a member of the consultant team, the Nick Jr. consultant team, as Vice Chair Mizell well knows, and he always brings a lot of thoughtful context to the conversation. So it was great to hear from him here. I wanted to mention on the subject of reimagining, I did send a story I had published yesterday regarding last week's council discussion. And what I want to point out is that what I was trying to do in the story was really bring folks up to speed on many of the different threads that have been going on. And the story links to kind of all the reports that have been produced, including the task force recommendations, which I didn't get to go in on depth, but it does link to those recommendations. So I think anyone who's trying to get up to speed before the May 5th council vote, I do think it's a good resource where people can see not only what I wrote, but also all the reports, the full reports, to have their to just learn what's been going on in advance of that vote. And then my other just final thought I'll leave you with is that on the subject Carol Marasovic had mentioned regarding the possibility of taking public comment during the meeting. And there's been sort of that process challenge that I raised before, where if we were all in the same room, Elliot Halpern or someone could say, hey, I'd like to have public comment on so-and-so item, and then the chair could allow that. But maybe while we're all still meeting virtually, maybe during the initial public comment, if there was a public interest in an item, people could state that, and then the chair or the board could then discuss or decide and say, okay, that's what we're going to do tonight on this item. We will hold public comment. I don't know how you formalize that, if that idea would have support, but I'm just trying to think about ways more people can engage on individual items when there's like a strong desire from the public, certainly not for everything, in my opinion. But that was my thought tonight and my idea, and thank you all. And I'm looking forward to hearing this traffic enforcement presentation. So I'll let us all get on to that. Thank you.
You're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. It does not appear to be other people who would like to speak.
I don't see anybody else, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing, and we will pivot to our training. It's now 8:27. Thank you, Lieutenant Tate, for taking the time to meet with us.
Of course, thanks for having me. I see lots of familiar faces, some that I don't know yet. So I'll just start by introducing myself. I'm Lieutenant Jen Tate. I am the lieutenant in the Traffic Bureau for the Police Department. And I will be giving you a presentation on traffic enforcement as well as collision investigations. If I can share my screen, let's see here.
I think you should be able to.
Okay. You guys see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so just starting out to give you an idea of where I'm situated in the department. The traffic enforcement unit falls under the investigations division in the police department. I have a captain above me, and then I oversee both the sworn traffic officers as well as parking enforcement. So we are all housed at the police substation down at 125 University. Getting into this, as I said, I want to take you through first our collision investigation aspect that is in line with why we do collision investigations, and then how that leads into traffic enforcement as well as DUI investigations. So getting into it, motor vehicle crashes are the second leading cause of death for people in the United States. All of these sources are listed in my PowerPoint. So if anyone would like the PowerPoint, you can click on the link for the source and it will provide you that information. So this is coming from CDC. And in short, if you look at unintentional injuries, those are by far the highest in 2020 for the leading cause of death in folks aged 1 through 44. And in looking at it, you can see the motor vehicle traffic collisions, how they are second behind poisoning. And that's important as we get into looking at our Berkeley statistics. This is a 5 year, so SWTRS is the statewide integrated traffic reporting system, and that's where all of our collision data goes, and they keep track of it. And when we look at it for January 2016 to 2021, which is the most up-to-date that they have, the City of Berkeley officers have investigated 4,461 total collisions, and of those, 1,856 were injury collisions. 414 involved bicycles, and about 54% of those were found at fault. Now, there are people who have pointed out the fact that when you have a solo bicycle versus pavement, that is technically a collision, which is probably underreported. However, if there is a collision taken, that investigation would commonly find if it's a solo vehicle being a bicycle and pavement. Speed is typically an associated factor, but that would be the fault of the bicycle. So this does not pull out just the solo vehicle. This includes both. That said, 407 involved pedestrians, where 19 of them were found at fault. 15 fatal collisions in that whole time frame. As you know, 8 of those were last year. 215 hit and runs with injury. 41 DUI felony collisions. A felony collision for DUI is anything that involves injury to anyone other than the driver who is found to be DUI at the time. Another interesting thing that people like to hear about are the top collision intersections in the city. So last year, if you look, Ashby and San Pablo had the highest number of collisions in the city. So when we start looking at data-driven enforcement in areas that we might want to do enforcement, these sorts of statistics are helpful because it gives us an idea of where the majority of the injury collisions are happening. And then when you look at primary collision factors, so you'll hear me say PCF a few times throughout this presentation, and that stands for primary collision factor, which is the causal factor that is most likely to have caused the collision to occur. 22,350 is speed, so a basic speed violation, we're looking at 94. 22,107 is an unsafe turn, so that's 88. And then the 21,800 sections here are all right-of-way violations, so it could be not yielding to someone at a intersection that's controlled by a stop sign, or they come up to a stop sign and there's an uncontrolled intersection for the other direction and they proceed into traffic. So 52 there. 23,152 is DUI related. And then 21,950 is violation of pedestrian right of way. So there's 16. So those are our primary collision factors for last year. And then as we get into our bicycle and pedestrian data, looking at the most common primary collision factor for bicycles is speed. So again, I said that if you have an individual who just loses control of their bicycle and falls off their bike, that's going to be speed. I will say that, again, this is underreported. More times than not, officers will go out to the scene and we offer to take the collision report, but if they refuse, it tends to just be a fall on city property. And that's the way it's documented. So 22,450 is going to be the stop sign violation. And then you have, again, the right-of-way violations being 8. Looking at the beat, so if you were to look at our 16 beats in the city of Berkeley where our police officers patrol, these are identified as the location where these crashes most commonly occur. So you can see that beats 1 and 2, as well as 13 and 14, saw the highest number of 12 collisions during this 2021 sort of snapshot, looking at just bicycles, and then followed by beats 3 and 4. So the time frame that we're looking at is also relevant for when we're doing our enforcement. So looking at the bicycle, you have 22 between the time frame of 9 o'clock in the morning to basically 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then 3 o'clock in the afternoon to just before 9 o'clock at night. And then for pedestrian collisions, the most common primary collision factor is 21,950, which is failing to yield to a pedestrian in a crosswalk. And then you have DUI followed by unsafe turn. And then again, there's the beat allocations as well as the time allocations. So for pedestrians, the most common is sort of as the sun is going down, 3 o'clock to just before 9 o'clock. So the Office of Traffic Safety, as I refer to it as OTS, in 2019, this is the most recent statistics that they have available for us. Berkeley falls in what they call Group B. So there are 59 cities in the state of California that have a population of basically 100,000 to 250,000 that are similarly situated like Berkeley. So of those 59 cities, this is where the city of Berkeley falls. So if you look down, we have commonly been number 1, or I should say in the top 3 for bicycle, pedestrian, and motorcycle collisions, which is where our OTS grants come from. They continue to give us these grants because they see that we have some issues with pedestrians and bicyclists and motorcyclists and their safety on our roadways. So that's where some of these grants are coming from. And that's when we deploy officers working the grant overtime, we're directing them to specific things. So number 1 means that we're higher than any other similarly situated city of these 59 cities. So as we get into what sort of training police officers have for collision investigation, they get their basic academy. Their police officer standards of training requires them to go through the traffic enforcement as well as collision investigation. So as we look at the things that they're learning in those learning domains as they're at the police academy, it's basic principles of the California Vehicle Code, which includes violations, the differences between moving violations and infractions or equipment violations, and misdemeanors, which would be considered something that someone is arrestable for. So they go through learning to differentiate between these things. Legally established probable cause to provide quality of life and public safety within the community. So how to do enforcement, how to recognize vehicle code violations. Those things could be DUI, hit and run, reckless driving, and then also, again, their authority to arrest. Manage scene and safety at collisions, and also caring for injured and protecting evidence. We'll get a little bit deeper into the weeds on some of this stuff. And then preparing a report. The collision report is on a California Highway Patrol. It's called a 555 form. That's a long form, and that has all the information for who the driver was, who the passengers were, any witnesses. It has the type of vehicle, the direction that they were traveling, the speed limit on the roadway, their insurance information, their home address, all the personal identifying information, and then basically statements for everyone as far as what happened. So officers have to prepare the report, document injuries, establish all of this information, all the events that led up to the collision, determine where the two cars collided. We call that an area of impact. And again, doing all the witness interviews and documenting that. So there's a difference between your patrol officer on the street who has never worked in the traffic bureau. So a traffic enforcement officer assigned to the traffic bureau goes through a whole nother layer of training. And what that looks like is intermediate traffic investigation is 40 hours, advanced traffic investigation is 80, collision reconstruction is another 80 hours. And these are things where we're actually looking at the physics. So we're going into the laws of physics and we're learning skid from speed analysis and all of these things, drag factor, and how it translates into approximate speed of a vehicle when we have nothing else. We have no witness, it could be a fatality. And our folks are going out trying to establish what happened and recreate that scene. So that's why these courses are so imperative. Auto pedestrian collision investigation, which is very important in the city of Berkeley. As I pointed out, we're ranked #1 in similarly situated cities. Radar operator, child safety seat technician. Child safety seat technician is important, and especially not only in helping the public learn how to properly install car seats, but also being able to identify an improperly installed car seat that's been involved in a collision where, God forbid, a child is injured. So we would be able to actually look and see if there was any negligence on the part of the parent for the installation, or which way was the kid facing in the seat, and how old are they, and whether or not they were following the established law as far as the child safety seat installation is concerned. And then there's also standard field sobriety testing. So that's just the basic one, is 24 hours. I would say that the majority of our folks have gone even further, and they do advanced roadside detection. And then there's a few of them who've also gone through drug recognition expert school, which is another 2-week-long program where you can recognize signs and symptoms of drug impairment and combinations of alcohol and drugs. And then there's also Draeger and PAS. Those are our chemical tests, so our breath chemical testing machines that we use both in the field as well as in the jail. So this is all the training that your traffic officers are getting, which is far more than when people advocate for having transportation handle collision investigations so that they can look at things like Vision Zero stuff. What I would say is that there was so much more to this, especially potentially a criminal layer, is we peel back the layers of the collisions and their causes. And while we can share the data with transportation to align with Vision Zero goals, it's very important that you have properly trained people out there investigating the collisions. And then determining the party most at fault. So we were talking about the primary collision factor. Officers determine that by driver statements, witness statements, looking at physical evidence at the scene, which could include the tire friction marks, skid marks, any sort of collision debris, gouges, marks in the roadway. Surveillance footage is a big one. For us, we have had numerous crashes where there's just no one there, or there could be conflicting statements, and we might find a perfectly situated camera on a business and they're willing to share the footage with us, and we can figure out what happened. And we actually had that, unfortunately, in one of our fatalities. So it certainly can be useful. And then vehicle damage, sometimes you can actually physically take two cars and put them together at the tow yard and figure out exactly how the cars came together to figure out what direction they were going if you have no one to share that information with you. And then the area of impact measurements. And then for fatal collisions, we'll get a little bit more into the weeds on this, the electronic data recorder. So the EDR is basically a black box in your vehicle, and newer cars have them, and a lot of people don't know it. So as you're driving down the road, your vehicle speed is being recorded. So it has your vehicle speed at the time of a collision. So it basically, at the time of the crash, there's a snapshot. So imagine, I'm sure you guys know a lot about our body camera footage, where it gives you a 30-second buffering period where it backs up. So this is like that same kind of idea of a snapshot, where it gives you everything that happened preceding a few seconds before the crash. So it'll tell you whether or not there was any steering wheel input, whether or not the throttle was activated, whether or not the brakes were activated. So these things can be super helpful, absent any witnesses, to tell us what was happening to that driver at the time the collision happened, especially in fatals. So the collision scene management, this is just a little bit from our policy. So the first officer to arrive on the scene of a collision is supposed to manage and basically stabilize the scene. So they're the ones who are saying, hey, this is really bad. I need traffic control here. I need X number of ambulances. And then they basically get there, and they're the eyes and the ears for everyone until more resources arrive. And then once the initial scene management gets going, they determine the extent and number of injuries, ask for the fire department, they broadcast whether or not it's injury, non-injury, as I explained. And then at that point, they can start doing any sort of medical aid if necessary, until the fire department can get there, and determining need for traffic control, asking for expedited tow trucks, things of that. So they tend to be very complicated scenes that need resources right away. And then once the debris kind of settles, they start going into their investigation. So that's when you'll see the use of flares and traffic cones and barricades, and then trying to divert traffic and get the scene stabilized. So once everything is sort of calmed down, that's where the officers will start talking to folks. They'll figure out who was driving, get their statements, figure out who the passengers were, what their positions were in the vehicles, get their statements. If anyone has been taken to the hospital, it may be that if they need medical attention, the officer could stay at the scene and continue their investigation until they can get to the hospital and take their statement. And then again, identify and get witness statements. A lot of times witnesses will be sort of the deciding factor. When you have an uninvolved witness or two that say this car was going this direction, and someone is adamant that they had a green light and someone else is adamant that they had a green light, witnesses can really be key in those investigations. And then determining whether or not they were wearing seatbelts. A lot of times people will end up with pretty severe injuries. We recently had a fatality where someone did not have a seatbelt on. So then that lends to the question of what would their injuries have been had they been wearing their seatbelt. Determine whether the involved parties were in possession of personal communication device at the time of the collision. So we've had collisions where people are involved in texting, if they're willing to admit it. So that's something that is also by and large underreported. If someone knows that they just caused a crash, they are not likely to tell you that I was in the middle of texting and I didn't see them. It's usually, oh, they just stopped and I didn't see them. So we've had that feedback of, we want to know if people are on their cell phones, but the reality is that I don't know that people are being completely honest as to whether or not they were talking or texting or doing the things that are distracting them as they're driving. But that is something that we have a box that we mark. If someone says that they were on their phone, we mark that in the report. And then, of course, looking for objective symptoms of any sort of alcohol or drug impairment. So these are all things that are happening at a collision investigation. If someone, what we have seen recently, especially with COVID, is that the Department of Motor Vehicles were not doing driver's tests in the way that they were, especially for our aging community. So what they were doing is they were just renewing licenses by mail. And there are times where we find that someone has suffered a medical condition or says that they couldn't see something, or there's something that just isn't right. And in their statement to the officer, we have the ability to fill out a form, and it's called a priority reexamination. So we have the ability to do a priority, meaning like within 5 days or within a couple of weeks, to make a recommendation to the Department of Motor Vehicles that this person be tested. And there's a whole long checklist of why we want them to be tested. And it might be they suffered some sort of medical condition, or they said that they have seizures, or they had a seizure or something like that, where we feel that it warrants them, for the safety of the community and themselves, to be retested. So that's a form that we consider filling out depending on the circumstances. Again, we figure out the area of impact, take any measurements after the vehicles are moved. And then, so this is something that I thought that I would throw in here and address as a conversation starter, really. There's an issue of notice to appear. So that's giving a citation at the conclusion of a collision investigation. So all California Vehicle Code 40,600A says is that if you've completed a basic collision investigation course, that when you're doing a collision investigation and you determine that someone has violated the law in some way, that an officer can issue a citation for that moving violation. So as a matter of practice, what I would like to address is our officers are typically not issuing a citation for every single collision that they go out to when they figure out conclusively that someone violated the vehicle code. And the reason for that is because when we're taking a collision report and that goes to the Department of Motor Vehicles, that human is already going to get a point on the record. So if we issue a citation, we're basically giving them another point on the record. It's like double dipping, and it's not, in my opinion, that is something that should be held on to for something that is the most severe. So there are times where our traffic analyst will review a report because she reviews all the collision reports. And if she finds that there's something that is just absolutely egregious and the person suffered serious injuries, then she may actually mail the individual a citation. So that's something that she can do. For the most part, when she's going through it, she may read something and see, well, it sounds like this person might have had a medical condition, and she may actually do the priority re-exam instead. But to the question of why are we not issuing citations when we've determined that someone is at fault for a collision, the reason is because the individual would end up with not only the moving violation potentially on the record, but also the point for having been involved in the collision being then 2 moving violations, which can be very hefty as far as insurance rates are concerned. Protect personal property of an individual party from theft or loss. So basically, if someone goes to the hospital and their vehicle is disabled, this is where we'll be towing the vehicle for safekeeping or blocking the roadway. It could be a bicycle that is left at the scene. We'll pick it up, or any belongings that might have been stripped from the person as they're getting medical aid. So these are things that we'll take for safekeeping if we can't find someone to take the property for the individual, or if they don't want anyone else to take it. So that's basically the next prong here. And then we issue a report receipt at the end of the collision investigation that the individual can share with their insurance company. And then we always let them know that they need to notify DMV that they were involved in a collision, typically within 24 hours. And we can either direct them to DMV's website or the appropriate form at the front counter of the police department. So the question of why should police officers do these investigations? And I've sort of touched on it already, that we have expertise in collision dynamics from training and experience. Years ago, when we were fully staffed, our motor officers or our traffic enforcement officers were out handling every one of our injury collisions. And the reason for that was because they had the most experience, and they go to all of these schools, so they should be the ones that are handling these collisions. Since we've been short-staffed, the way that it works now is our patrol officers will go out and they will handle all non-transport collisions when there's a motor officer available and there is a transport where someone's being transported to the hospital and it's more serious. If there's a motor officer available, right now we only have 2, they will go and they will handle the collision. But again, they're only there Monday through Thursday during normal business hours. So outside of that, it's our patrol officers that are handling it. We have advanced tools in our traffic bureau, like FARO. So FARO we'll get into in a little bit, and it's basically capturing the scene at a major injury or fatal collision investigation. LiDAR is our speed enforcement, and then Total Station is similar to the FARO and is a more outdated version, so we use the FARO. We maintain and submit data for state and nationwide collision statistics. Collisions can turn into criminal investigations, and examples of those would be DUI investigation, vehicular manslaughter, someone who's intentionally ramming someone with their vehicle, that would be an assault. And then police also have the ability to write search warrants for additional evidence. So that's similar to the EDR, the black box I was talking about that is maintained in a vehicle. Cell phone warrants, medical records, things of that nature that your average person doesn't have the ability to do. And then, so this is a picture of our FARO. So if ever you see us out on the street with us, it's a pretty cool piece of engineering equipment. And we had a week-long class to learn how to use it, set it up, level it. And this thing is amazing. It's basically like a camera. It spins around and takes a ton of photos. And I'm going to give you an example of what it does and why. So it uses laser technology and gives us a detailed 3-dimensional image of complex environments. So we can actually get down and it will capture inside of a vehicle. We can move it around inside of a vehicle to show crush damage. We can take it out to a scene and we can get all the evidence placards. And this thing has amazing diagramming tools that allow us to put these points into a picture. So it gives you exact digital reproduction, and this is an overlay of it. So this is a collision involving a bus. So you can see the bus down here and then a car over here that it hit. And as we go through, you can see it almost looks like so this was all taken down on the street, of course, but it has the ability to give you this flyover view because it just has the capability of picking up so much. And this is what I was talking about when we have evidence markers out, we can actually label what the evidence marker is. And this technology gives us the ability to physically click on this link, and it will, if I were to click on this little tag here, it would take me to a photo, and it's showing us how wide the skid mark is. And this is an overview of it. So this is how we build it. As we go in, we have this overlay of where, so this is showing you that there are cameras located on this building here. And if we click on this, we're actually able to take the surveillance footage that relates to this. So this is like a beautiful piece of evidence, if you will. So you touch it and it will give you photos of the evidence there, but then I can also touch one of those cameras and it will take me to the surveillance footage. So the district attorney's office can sit there and go through and actually see all of the physical evidence of this collision scene as they're considering prosecution or whatnot. So this is what our technology does. And again, this is just images taken from that little machine. And so this is what it would look like. So this shows you that there's video footage up here. Can you guys see my mouse? Okay, so there's this right here is where there's a camera, and this captured a collision that occurred. And if I were to click on that, it would actually take me. So this is what it looks like. And then it would take me all the way through this scenario of whatever it captured in that moment for that crash. It's things like speed limits, but again, images of the camera. Do you guys have any questions before we move into traffic stops, or would you prefer me to just go right through to the end?
You can, I don't have any questions.
Excellent. So moving into traffic stops, some of the reasons that we make traffic stops are for moving violations for unsafe driving. So we just talked about all these crashes. And when we talk about trying to change driving behavior, one element of that is traffic enforcement. And we focus on unsafe driving behavior. So as a matter of practice, we're looking at what those primary collision factors are. So we focus on the PCF, and we would go out and we would look for people running stop signs because we know that those are dangerous in our city. We look for people who are violating pedestrian right-of-ways. We look for people who are doing unsafe turning movements, things of that nature, again, that focus on the primary collision factor. Equipment violations are important at times because there are things like we had a fatality that involved a vehicle where there was expired registration of greater than 6 months. Had that vehicle not been on the road, it likely would not have been involved in the fatal collision that it was involved in, but it led to other things like the driver did not have a valid driver's license. The driver was not maintaining the equipment on the vehicle. So when we get into equipment violations, those things can be important to consider. The other thing is a broken tail light. And it might seem like a trivial thing. I'm not talking about just a cracked tail light with a little bit of light. I'm talking about like the giant hole in the brake light. And when the driver in front of you hits the brakes, we've all experienced it, the blinding light where now your night vision is screwed up because you can't see, or a completely shattered windshield that someone's driving around with. So those are things that we want to be cognizant of. So something isn't maintained and it basically elevates it to a safety issue. Suspect involved in a crime, or there's a crime report where a vehicle is described and we're given a license plate or it's similar in description. We have an in-progress crime that matches the suspect or vehicle description. A previous crime where there might be a warrant attached to the vehicle or the registered owner is in the wanted person system. Matches a bulletin for a wanted vehicle or a stolen vehicle. So those are all reasons that we might stop a vehicle. So I wanted to turn to LEOCA, and LEOCA stands for Law Enforcement Officers Killed and Assaulted. And LEOCA is a database that is maintained by the FBI, and they basically take a look at anytime an officer is assaulted or killed in the line of duty. They compile that information so that they can give those statistics to the community, to law enforcement, and it sort of drives law enforcement training so that we can learn from where officers have been targeted by assaults in order to develop training to make us safer. So as we look at that, they provided some information here about just in the past, say they're looking at 2010 to 2020, the rate of aggravated assaults by population. So the pink here is all of the United States and the blue is California. So it shows you that generally aggravated assault offenses by a population has gone up both nationally as well as just the state of California. And the rate of violent crime offenses by population has also been seeing an uptick. And then this is information that shows just for Berkeley PD, it shows, of course, that we're in Alameda County, and it shows the police employment totals for our agency. And they keep track of all this information. And over the years, it shows you how basically our staffing has gone down. And as we look at that, what that translates to is fewer officers means a delay in officers who are asking for assistance getting the assistance that they need, because we have to travel further, we're spread out, and it makes us more vulnerable to assaults. As we look at 2021, there was a drastic increase in line of duty deaths, and that's what you're seeing. These are national statistics for police officers who have been killed in the line of duty. So in 2021, we're looking at 73. And as we look at the cause of the deaths, 73 of them, right, were felonious. As we're looking at the traffic violation stop, it's the second highest under unprovoked attacks. And then as we look over here, accidental, where officers are out doing something foolish at a car stop, no one died because of an accident at a ar stop. So these, by and large, we have always understood that car stops can be very dangerous. They account for about 8.4% of officers' assaults in 2019. And this was the latest statistic that we had. I won't bore you with a lot of the statistics, but some of the things that we have learned from LEOCA and officers who have been injured and killed in the line of duty is that car stops are generally recognized within law enforcement based on all of the information that we have from the assaults that have occurred. It's one of the most dangerous things that we do. They're unpredictable. You don't know what someone is doing. By and large, the majority of car stops are going to be fine. But what we're talking about is the small percentage where folks have a warrant, or they're wanted, or they're in a stolen vehicle, and we might not know any of that information. And all we're doing, alas, is just issuing them a stop sign citation so that, or that's our intention, to slow them down and drive our collision stats down. But what we don't know is who that person is and what their intentions are. So it can rapidly evolve to a violent encounter, and the tactical advantage is with a driver because they already have a plan. They've more than likely already thought about what they're going to do if they're stopped by the police. And depending on their reasoning for it, they could be very committed to injuring or killing the officer in their pursuit of fleeing. So officers have a reactionary disadvantage in that case. When we look at some of the tactics that officers use on the car stops, I think it's important to show. So this shows gun side away. So the vehicle offset, you can see here that the vehicle is sort of canted out more into traffic. Typically we'll turn the wheels. It gives us a safety bubble from cars driving by in the event that the patrol car is hit by an oncoming vehicle. Additionally, it gives us, so the gun side is away from the driver, and it gives us an advantage to be able to actually see the cars coming at us as well. So some of the pros to passenger side approach, as you see here, which the Highway Patrol commonly does because they have the vehicles traveling at freeway speed, so close to the driver's side of the vehicle. The pros are the driver's not necessarily expecting a passenger side approach. It keeps the officer out of the lane of traffic. Different view of the interior. So you can see the vehicle glove box as they open it. You're a little bit closer to those things, and you're less vulnerable if the vehicle flees. They can take off and you're there on the side of the road. The cons are, if someone is on the other side of the vehicle from me, I'm not necessarily able to smell or pick up on some of the more subtle cues of someone who could be under the influence. So that might not be as apparent. It can be harder to hear or speak to the driver, especially if they're wearing a mask. Have to momentarily turn your back to the car to approach or walk between the vehicles. So either you're going to walk around the back of your car, or one of the least favorable options is to walk between the cars. We've actually had an officer retire out on medical for a car that backed into them. takes more time to reach the driver in the event that they're trying to flee or do something that you're trying to control their hands. And then looking at police motorcycle stops, they are definitely more vulnerable because there's less cover or concealment if there were any sort of attack. They have very little protection from gunfire. You basically get down behind the rear wheel and that's it. And there's no safety bubble from a larger vehicle or that a larger vehicle sort of gives you. And this is generally why you might see motorcycle officers do a passenger side approach. So some of the considerations are at nighttime, you can see that you have drastically reduced visibility. Spotlights, people get really frustrated over the spotlights and the flashlights, but honestly, as we're going up, again, I've already talked to you about a driver knows what they have in their car. And if they're intent on doing harm to the officer, especially at nighttime, is at a disadvantage. So that's why we do everything that we can to light the car up. And it's really just for everyone's safety, primarily for the officer to be able to see and perceive any sort of threat that might happen. So that's why we use the spotlights and the flashlight. So as we look at overall the summary of car stops, officers are trained through LEOCA stats about the dangers of vehicle stops. They have to be mindful about approaching traffic. So they're constantly looking, they're thinking about their approach to the vehicle, how many people are in the car, if they haven't, do they need another cover officer? They're trained to touch the vehicle as they approach the trunk to see whether or not there's, maybe someone in there to ambush. And again, these things are all from LEOCA because we know that people have hidden in trunks and they've jumped out and they've ambushed officers. So they might touch the car as they walk up and then they cant their body, they do the gun side away, and they're primarily looking if they're on the driver's side so that they can both see and focus on the driver as well as oncoming traffic. So these are all things that are going on. And then also, there are times where individuals don't want to be stopped. So as the officer is trying to navigate all of these other things and all of the training that they've heard about how wrong car stops can go, they're still trying to be respectful, polite, and courteous and explain to the driver what's going on. So then they'll issue the citation and hopefully safely be on their way. But all of that to say that the officer is dividing their attention to the dangers inside of the vehicle, any threats coming from vehicles that could potentially hit them. And they're also trained to have strict control of the occupant's movement. And again, that is trained from the academy level all the way up to in-service training. So you may have an officer, the cover officer primarily will stand at the driver's side or the passenger side of the vehicle. And while the other officer, the primary officer, may go back and do a warrants check or issue the citation, write it at the safety of their vehicle, the cover officer will be standing there and watching everything going on in the vehicle. And why? Because we talked about all the training that tells us that those are the most dangerous things that we do. So that's sort of the tactics around the car stop. So getting into some of the DUI enforcement and the alcohol and drug recognition, NHTSA is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and they sponsored a study that Dr. Burns did, Michelle Burns, back in the 1970s in conjunction with law enforcement. She's a scientist, and she worked through all of these tests and implemented, basically they figured out the field sobriety test battery, and I'm going to take you through that. Prior to doing that, I'll tell you a little bit about the development of the 24 driving cues. So there was a study done to figure out whether or not they could determine sort of driving behavior, and this is based on DUI arrest reports and whatnot, what driving cues indicated that someone might be impaired. And they broke it down into 4 categories. And one is problems maintaining proper lane position, speed and braking problems, vigilance problems, and judgment problems. So those are the 4 things that we're looking at. And this is the really hard to read old DWI detection guide. And while this is old, this is still very valid and used today, especially with the Highway Patrol and all of the standard field sobriety test training that they do. And they teach our officers this in the academy, that these are things that we're looking at. And some of you might have seen it even in a DMV handbook. And they talk about weaving and weaving across the lane lines and straddling lane lines. So all of those things that we think about that we've built into recognizing as, oh, wow, that person looks like they could be DUI, is from this. And it's scientifically backed. And so their indicators here are any two cues, weaving plus any cue gives you a probability of about 65% chance of impairment. Any two cues, the probability is at least 50%. So that's without the weaving. So as you go through here, you can see the reason why it's important that officers are taught this so that they can recognize some of the signs of someone being under the influence. And then post-stop cues, these are probability of greater than 85%, difficulty with the vehicle, motor controls, exiting the vehicle, fumbling with the driver's license or registration, repeating questions and comments, swaying, leaning on the vehicle, slurred speech, slow to respond. So these are all things that they're trying to pay attention to as they're filling out their DUI card. And then we also look at driving without the headlights on is another big one at nighttime. And people sometimes think, oh, I'm just going to flash my headlights at them, that, maybe they just forgot. But for us, we know that sometimes when you get in the car, you're not focused on that. You're just focused on basically two things. Whatever those two things are, that's all you got. And sometimes it's not the headlights. It might just be focusing on speed and keeping it between the lane lines. But that's where some of these other things get missed. And then looking at the enforcement and recognition. So we talked about the scientifically validated DUI tests. So those three tests that are the standard field sobriety test battery involve the horizontal gaze nystagmus, we call it HGN, and the walk and turn, as well as the one leg stand. There are other tests that we do that are also good indicators that help us establish our case. And those are finger to nose, Romberg, and sometimes, depending on the person's ability, we will also do a number count, or we'll have them write their alphabet or sign their name to see whether or not things look similar to, like, does their signature that they're signing look similar to their driver's license? So taking you through what the three test battery is. So the horizontal gaze nystagmus involves an involuntary jerking of the eye. So if you think about it, if I were to take a marble and if I were to roll it across a smooth surface, it would just glide and it would be smooth. You wouldn't see any interruptions. Someone who is under the influence, let's just say of alcohol, you'll see an involuntary jerking in their eye. So as I'm moving my finger, you'll actually see a bounce in their eye. And I will tell you that it's fascinating. And all of the classes that I've taught, as I'm moving my finger, when we've dosed people to get them to a certain level, you can see how the bounce increases the more alcohol they've had. So there are 3 cues that we look for between each eye for a total of 6 cues. So their eye doesn't follow my finger smoothly. Distinct and sustained nystagmus at maximum deviation means that as the person is tracking my finger, how far can I take them over? How far can my finger go before they lose sight of my finger? That's where I'm taking them. That's maximum deviation. So as I'm holding my finger there, you can see an involuntary bouncing of the eye for someone who's under the influence of, again, let's just talk about alcohol, a depressant, it's going to bounce. So if I have the not following smoothly and I have the jerking at maximum deviation, I have 2 of the 3 indicators that I'm looking for. And then when I look at the angle of onset prior to 45, if I'm looking at my shoulder, and if I imagine from the tip of my shoulder out, there's a 90-degree angle. If I take half of that, that's 45. So officers actually have a card that they can hold up that shows them what the angle is. And if they start bouncing anywhere between 0 and 45 degrees, I now have my third indicator. I don't even need to know what that calculation is. There is a science behind figuring out what the level of impairment is at that point. But if I have all 6 cues, all I need is 4. So between the 2 eyes, if they don't follow smoothly and they have distinct sustained nystagmus, that's 2. Adding the other eye, if it's the same in the other eye, I now have 4. The science tells me that I have an 88% chance that that person is 08 or greater. And that's where they say it's all in the eyes. So that's the science behind the horizontal gaze nystagmus. And then as we look at the walk and turn, the indicators that we're looking for there, it's a divided attention test, and there's 2 phases. So there's the instruction phase where we put the person in the position that we want them to stand in to do the test. Then there's a walking phase where they're actually performing the test, and we're evaluating whether or not they can keep their balance during the instructions, whether or not they start walking too soon, if they use their arms, if they step off the line, if they don't touch heel to toe, if they stop walking during the test, or if they turn incorrectly. So these are all things that the officers out there demonstrating, explaining off the DUI form, and then asking them to do. And then also incorrect number of steps. So what the science tells us is that if there are 2 or more of any of these things on here, I have a 79% chance that this person's blood alcohol level is 08 or greater. And then the third one being the one-leg stand test. So again, this is a divided attention test with 2 phases. It has the instruction phase where I'm telling the person how to stand, how to listen, like where I want them prior to the test, and then the balancing. So there are 4 cues total. Those are swaying while they're balancing. They put the foot down during the balancing. They hop around, or they use their arms. Start walking too soon is not part of that. So I apologize. That's my bad on there. So just looking at the top 4, 2 or more cues indicate, so all I need are 2. So swaying, putting foot down, hopping, or using their arms. If they do any 2 of those things, I have an 83% accuracy that that person is 08 or greater. So what we're teaching our officers is based on all of this information in the 3-test battery. It meets the Frye standard for evidence in court. And if an individual meets all of the minimum number of indicators, there is a 94% chance that that person is 08 or greater. So part of the reason that I'm sharing this with you is it takes time to do these, and it's an inconvenience for the driver. What I offer is that DUI is a problem in our city, and it's important that our officers get this training and continue to do DUI enforcement to try to drive down and hold people accountable for our DUI statistics. So that's where we are with the DUI enforcement. And it looks like I am done in just under an hour. That's all I have. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Lieutenant Tate. We'd like to open it up to questions.
I have a quick question, if I can ask.
Yes.
You stated at the early onset of the training that Ashby seems to be a huge problem. I think it was Ashby and San Pablo and Ashby and Telegraph. So what other enforcements are you doing there to try to eliminate, the accidents? And are those at traffic lights or, just?
Yeah, so it's the nearest intersection. So it could be north or south of, east or west of. But by and large, we recognize that they're very highly traveled major arterials in our city that also happen to be state routes. So traffic engineering is aware of it. There are some challenges with Caltrans and working on, what it might look like to improve that area. But as far as enforcement goes, we're always encouraging folks to go out and enforce the no left turn. between 4 and 6 when you're driving through there. And then, yes, just red light enforcement, anything else that we can do. We will also do like distracted driving in areas like that, where we're looking for cell phone violators or people who are just doing things that they shouldn't be doing. So any type of enforcement that we can do in those areas, we try to do.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And Board Member Leftwich, and then, Board Member Leftwich next.
Thank you, Lieutenant Tate. That was very interesting, very informative. Kind of along a similar line. I know that when I'm out driving and it's a busy intersection, it seems to me that people making left turns, that's kind of a dangerous decision. You know, the light's going to turn. Should I go? Is the other person going to go to push the red light? And it seems to me that one thing that would greatly improve safety is if there were left turn only lights, if there were arrows in some of those intersections. Similarly with pedestrian deaths, I know around the campus on Oxford, when somebody wants to cross the street, they push a button and the crosswalk lights up, which also seems really effective. And I'm just wondering, I had two questions, but the first one was, are there efforts to combat some of these dangers with things like, okay, we're going to put in a left turn only light and or pedestrian lights?
Great question and great point. Yes, so we actually, I'm happy to share that we're part of a grant with the Safe Trek at UC Berkeley, if anyone has heard of it. And they actually just came out and did an analysis for our safe routes to school and some of the major locations around some of our elementary schools to sort of address some of those things. What I understand is that traffic engineering is, they would be the lead on that. And some of it is budgetary and some of it is just workflow and trying to prioritize the major intersections that are concerns for, high collisions and whatnot. I think that they're looking at that. That's more or less under their realm. We can see it, sure, and we can collaborate with them on areas that we're seeing as being high collision intersections. But as far as the actual work for that, it's going to fall on transportation and traffic engineering.
Okay, thanks. The other question I had is, what is the policy? Say you see somebody who has a broken taillight or something that's relatively minor and you seek to pull them over and they refuse, they keep going. What is the protocol in that instance?
Well, it falls under our pursuit policy, in which case that's not something that you can pursue. You just do your very best to try to identify the vehicle or the driver and see what you can do to do some research to figure out if you can identify who that person was. Unfortunately, it's not something that we would ever chase.
Unfortunately?
I just mean there's no accountability for that person, is what I mean to say. Not unfortunately, I just mean unfortunately we can't hold them accountable for whatever it is. If you're talking about a minor violation, though, I think one thing I should point to is that in looking at our enforcement practice, it's based on moving violations and primary collision factors. That's been our focus. And things that are equipment violations that are elevated to something that has to do with traffic safety or something that's unsafe, those are things that we're looking at. So I would venture to say that we're not looking at just small cracked taillights.
So just to follow up on that. So if somebody runs a red light, what's the pursuit policy? I guess I'm not familiar with the pursuit policy.
We basically can't chase it. We can't chase it unless it is a violent felon with imminent threat to life.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So just before Board Member Mizell, so a violent felon with imminent threat to life. What if the high speed, the car that is speeding poses an imminent threat to life? You're saying that there must be a violent felon classification in addition to the potential, let's say they're going to run over a bunch of pedestrians?
So if you're just talking about a moving violation where they're fleeing from the officer, one would argue that the officer is the reason that that person is driving dangerously. So no, I don't have the pursuit policy in front of me verbatim, but I will tell you that if an officer observes a moving violation and they attempt to stop the vehicle and it takes off, that is not a chaseable vehicle. It's not within our policy.
Okay. There are also concerns that I know from other jurisdictions, not necessarily from Berkeley, but about pursuit through towns on roads that could result in escalation of potential injury through pursuit.
Okay.
Is that also part of the rationale too there?
Yeah, I think everyone has pretty much addressed pursuit policies in that there has been extreme loss of life and injury as a result of those. I mean, I can only speak to the City of Berkeley pursuit policy because that's where I work.
Sure. Thank you. Great presentation too. We have Vice Chair Mizell.
Thank you, Chair Chang. Thank you, Lieutenant Tate, for being here with us today. I appreciated the presentation. Can I ask, I guess with your professional experience, I mean, how effective do you think BPD is at preventing traffic collisions, pedestrian collisions, and the injuries and fatalities that come with it? And to be fair, I'm not asking that as some hypothetical or as some trick question, but just like, given the realities of the tools you have and the role of law enforcement, how effective would you say y'all are?
I think that we have been more effective in the past. If we're talking about right now today, I just shared that we have 2 available motor officers for the entire city of Berkeley. The rest of my folks are out on injury, or we have 2 folks that we're about to bring in and train up. I think that based on our staffing and some of the changes in our focus for traffic enforcement, it has created some ambiguity and challenges for our patrol officers. I have seen just recently, I think I looked last year and I want to say we stopped, it was in the low thousands for the number of vehicles that we stopped. And coincidentally, our collision statistics were through the roof last year. So I think if you're asking me right now if we're doing a good job, I would say we're not. And I would tell you that I believe that by and large, it has to do with staffing. There are a lot of things, a lot of trends happening nationally with COVID and the lack of DMV retesting and things of that nature that have led to this. But I think it's a complex, very layered question that I think I would just scratch the surface on.
Of course, I know obviously this is not a prepared statement, but if I could ask it, if you'd like to respond to this. This is from 1937. This is August Vollmer. This is what he wrote after his 30 years as chief of BPD. So I'll just read you 2 excerpts. Again, if you don't have a response, I totally understand. But here it is. The idea of individual responsibility for accidents is, of course, not new. It is upon this theory, indeed, that legislation for traffic regulation has been based. To place one's trust in rigid enforcement of traffic laws is futile. Enforcement does not ensure reduction in accidents because it does not succeed in inducing observance of the laws. Only the power of public opinion could compel respect and obedience. One other excerpt real fast. Here we go. However zealous the police may be in their attempts to perform traffic duties adequately, they are universally handicapped by the prevailing and unfortunate misconception that rigid enforcement will bring about the greatest returns in public safety on the streets and highways. The unwillingness of the public to face facts has greatly delayed the lessening of the disastrous toll exacting casualty incidents to travel and transportation in the United States. he goes on throughout this section. It's totally about traffic, talking about more or less how policing has a small role in traffic enforcement. Clearly, he thinks there should be enforcement, but how, by and large, in his time, 30 years, it had been a failure. He calls it futile. And I don't bring it up to attack you or the department. I want to be very clear. I bring this up because these are the words of the most prominent chief of this department ever in his reflections of traffic enforcement. I know it's been 30 years, but I bring this up because, or 80 years, excuse me. I bring this up because, but I think it's paramount to understand what has changed in our city in that time and our enforcement mechanisms and what could disprove the words of Chief Vollmer. Because, I mean, my concern ultimately is the safety of our city. And I mean, obviously, I hear your response about effectiveness being down because of numbers. I would be curious to look at data from the 2000s when the department had 200 officers compared to now. But I mean, given those two statements from the chief, at the time, obviously it's been a long time. I guess the question is, what do you think has changed in terms of our enforcement model since then? And why would it be more effective? Or why is it more effective? I don't know.
I think I'd like to start by saying, I think you said that was from 1937. Is that right?
Yes, it's from 1937.
Okay. So 80 something years ago, I think that we have not seen a lot of them. So yes, our roadways have changed. They haven't gotten any wider. I think we have an awful lot more people, different devices that people are motoring about and riding about on. We are dense. We are a very dense city that is only getting taller. And we're bringing more people in. We're going to have less parking. So with all of these things, I think you're absolutely right. Enforcement is only a piece of it. And I absolutely recognize that. But if there is no thought from a driver that they are going to be held accountable for going through a red light, what is to stop them from doing it? And sure, it doesn't have to be an officer. It could be a red light camera. If not an officer to sit there with a radar gun and issue speed citations, what is to slow that person down? What is going to compel them to do that? Me standing on the side of the road in my plain clothes outside of a uniform, giving someone a dirty look isn't necessarily going to slow them down. I see it with my own child as I walk down the street every day. So without the thought of some sort of ramification for bad driving behavior, what will compel people? And my thought is that it's enforcement. And it's enforcement that holds people accountable. And while we can look to be progressive in the way we find people and the way we take them through that system, I think that there needs to be a reminder of what it's like to be a good human and drive well and not hurt other people. So I think Vision Zero has the ultimate say in all of this. And it's how we work together to come up with that plan. And it's through engineering, it's through design, but there's also an education and enforcement piece to it.
I appreciate your answer. And, you know, I know it's 80 years ago, but I think many of the lessons Vollmer wrote there are very much still present in our city. If I can ask one follow-up to that, then how does the Traffic Enforcement Bureau and I guess traffic enforcement generally with the department work with engineering or other officials who work around traffic in the city around maybe, you know, hot spots in terms of collisions, design decisions? Is there any function with the department working in tandem in the city with something like that?
So I think we all have a lot that we're doing right now. Ideally, we would be meeting and talking about these issues, but right now what it is emails back and forth of this area is a concern. Can, like myself sending something to engineering, can you take a look at it? And typically they're out there right away addressing it. So really, it's just communication of those areas. Sometimes it is, they have done a redesign, and for instance, Delaware and Sacramento and the changes to the bicycle lanes there and the configuration of the traffic signal, they found that people were just not complying with what was happening there, and they reached out to me, and we supported their changes with traffic enforcement. So really, it's just communicating what the issues are. I think there's, we could stand to find a way to get deeper, I think, as the COVID restrictions are lifting, doing more educational stuff with the community as well. But really, it's just collaboration between our departments right now.
Okay, thank you. And so, yeah, I completely understand it's not BPD's fault that the streets are so wide in so many places in Berkeley. And I appreciate the work you do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Thank you. So this comment relates to something 10 minutes ago, which is the vehicle pursuit policy is V6, in case board members want to take a look at that. And thank you very much, Lieutenant Tate, for your interesting presentation.
Could you repeat that?
V as in Victor, or vehicle 6.
Okay.
Thank you, Board Member Owens.
I just have a question related to traffic design. Is the police department part of that design process, not after the fact, but during the process? Because to me, it's very clear that everyone who's impacted, whether it be enforcement, signs, signals, design of a building, because that can impact vision. Is the police department sitting at the table when those decisions are being made?
It's a good question. Yes. So they're just going through right now some proposals for Telegraph and Bancroft and Durant and Dana. And they have involved both police and fire departments to talk about like emergency vehicle access and any barriers that we see to any changes that they're looking at. So to a degree, as far as I know, I have been involved in some of those conversations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It was very good.
Welcome.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the lieutenant? Okay, I don't see any others. And thank you, Lieutenant, for coming and spending the time to train us on the traffic in Berkeley. Traffic enforcement, much appreciated. So we already did public comment. We moved it forward. So unless there's any other comments or questions, we're actually at adjournment. Someone can move to adjourn and we can second.
I'm sorry, who was that?
It was Harris.
Thank you.
Great. Any objections?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the second either.
Oh, I think was the Vice Chair Mizell.
I moved it and Member Harris second.
Oh, okay.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, not seeing any objections. No objections. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Okay.